Hi, my name is Paddy Hirsch. I'm a senior editor at Marketplace, and today I want to ask a question that a lot of people have been writing in and asking, which is where has all the toxic waste gone? The reason that a lot of people are asking this is because they've been hearing about a lot of trading activity of asset-backed securities in the secondary marketplace. Also because we've got the banks coming up to report very soon, and it's going to be interesting to see what they say about their holdings of these asset-backed securities and the toxic assets that they have. So let's get it up here. Where are these toxic assets? Whither are the toxic assets? Okay, and what I want to do is I want to use an analogy that I've been working on recently, which is about the Thanksgiving gravy. So if you think about Thanksgiving, when you have the bird there and you take it out of the oven and you've got a big sort of tray full of gravy there, you pour off the drippings and you make your mixing, and there you pour it into a jug. Okay, so here's your jug of gravy. There's a handle on it here, right? Okay. And when you pour it in here, it's all kind of brown and delicious looking and all the rest of it. And you can't really see what's going on in there. It's very opaque, okay? And that's what the securitization market, the market for all kinds of securities, looked like about a year or so ago. You know, no matter what these securities were backed by, credit cards, you know, senior secured loans, bonds, mortgages, whatever they may be, mortgage-backed securities, it was all kind of one mass, and everybody backed away from it. Nobody wanted to touch the gravy at that point. Everyone was just kind of checking it out and seeing. Well, since then, what's happened is the gravy has been settling out, and we all know what happens when gravy settles out. All right. Suddenly, we start to see this large layer of fat on the top, and nobody wants the fat. Okay, am I right? Nobody wants the fat. And in this case, what the fat is, if you think about the securities market, the fat is the stuff that's never, ever going to be worth anything. We're talking about these CDOs squared, you know, these CDOs that are backed by mortgage-backed securities that are backed by mortgages that nobody's ever going to pay. You know that this stuff is never going to be worth anything. It's obvious. Everybody knows this, okay? And that is the stuff that's settled to the top. That is the junk. That's the rubbish. But obviously it's the top, so how does that work? Well, if you think about one of these fat separators, anybody seen one of these things? Get them for about $15 from Williams-Sonoma, I think. So here you are with your fat separator. And what this does is this allows you to pour off the good stuff and leave the fat in place. It means you're not getting the fat mixed with the gravy. So a lot of investors have come to the table and they've said, you know what, we've looked at this, we've seen where the bad stuff is, and we know that there's fat still in the gravy here. We know it can be bad for you if you have too much of it, but we think that we'd like some of it. We think that there's some opportunities here that we can buy it. If we buy it cheaply enough, we can make some money. So we want to get involved. So these investors are stepping up. They've got their bowls out there. You know, they're waiting for the gravy to be poured out. And what's happening is the banks are also looking at their balance sheets, they're looking at their holdings of these asset-backed securities, they're watching them settle out, they've identified the stuff that nobody wants, and they're pouring off some of the good stuff and selling it to investors. Why? Well, because banks need money, as we all know. Okay, so the investors are getting hold of this stuff, which they think that if they're getting at a discount, they can make some money on, and the banks are pouring off this stuff because they know that they can make some money out of it. So what's happening to the fat? Well, as we know, if we have one of our fat separators, as the level of fat, as the gravy is poured out of the fat separator, well, the fat remains inside the jug. And that's exactly what's happened to the bank's balance sheet. They've been pouring off some of these securities, they've been selling some of them off, but the really bad stuff, the stuff that's never going to be worth anything, remains on the bank's balance sheets. So it's really, really important to remember when you're looking at these banks' earnings and you're listening to what they say, they are not selling this stuff. This stuff remains on their balance sheets. And let's talk a little bit about that balance sheet because it's important, because it gives us an idea about why the banks aren't lending so much of the money that's coming into them right now. We've heard a lot of complaints about banks getting lots of money from the government and from other sources, becoming recapitalized, but not actually lending very much of this money out, becoming very conservative. Well, if you think about a large tub of toxic waste, okay, stuck on your balance sheet, it's going to be weighing your balance sheet down. So what do? Well, it means that you've got to get something to balance it out. And what balances it out? Money. A big bag of money is what you need to balance out that toxic waste. Okay, and that's why the banks have been taking on all of this money. They've been getting it from the government, they've been getting it from shareholders who are buying new equity, and they've been getting it from these investors who have been buying some of the other asset-backed securities that they think are good, and then and pumping it into the bank's balance sheet. So what's going to happen to this toxic waste? Well, a number of things can happen. One of the things that the bank can do is it can sort of scoop out the gravy, if you want, and stick it into a jar and throw it into the back of the fridge. And people have talked a lot about this whole bad bank, good bank system, and that's what that would be. That would be taking off the fat, putting it into a new place, and kind of leaving it and hoping that they can actually, well, they would hope that they could actually sell some of the stuff off in the end, but it's very unlikely that that will happen. So what else is going to happen? Well, the other thing that they can do is they can get real about the toxic waste, okay? They can be honest about it. If they said to themselves, all right, let's really value this toxic waste, and they said to themselves, right, it's worth nothing. It's worth zero. If they valued it down to zero, then essentially it disappears. They need to have a very big bag of money to compensate for that because it counts as a big loss, okay? But they can get rid of that toxic waste by being honest and saying, we've looked at this stuff, we know we've got hundreds of millions or billions worth of this stuff, but we are admitting that it is worth zero, and we've raised enough money to compensate for that. When that happens, when they've done that, when they've been absolutely honest and they've marked it to market, and they've valued it at where the market believes it's worth, which is at a donut, then you can start to be more confident about the fact that the banks are on their way back to health again. But there's a real concern right now that the banks are not valuing these things accurately. They're keeping this toxic waste on their balance sheet, and they're hoping that one day it may recover, which is highly unlikely. All right. So what's the danger with this toxic waste? Well, the danger is that if the banks can't become capitalized enough, if they can't bring enough money onto their balance sheets, then it means that the toxic waste will start to unbalance them. Okay, and we're not out of the woods yet, I can tell you. And if the banks do become unbalanced, then we're right back where we started at. Some of these banks are enormous now after these acquisitions, and if they're weighed down by toxic waste and they're unable to value it properly, write it off, and compensate with enough cash, then that could make them fail, and that could leave us very badly needing a drink.